The smoke rising over Jerusalem wasn't just the end of a city, it was the funeral of an era. To the human eye, this looked like absolute defeat, the chosen people crushed under the boot of a pagan empire. The sacred temple was in ruins. God was silent. But appearances are dangerous liars. What looked like the end of history was actually the opening move of a far greater conflict. This wasn't just a military invasion. It was the beginning of an invisible war that would silently reshape the destiny of mankind forever. From the smoking ruins of Judah, they were marched into the blinding heart of the empire. Babylon did not look like a prison. It looked like paradise. The streets were paved with ambition. The hanging gardens defied gravity, and the air itself smelled of spices and power. But make no mistake, the golden walls were not built to keep them in. They were built to keep reality out. Here, within the suffocating luxury of the palace, a calculated process of transformation began. We often think the cruelty of Babylon lay in its swords and chariots. But Nebuchadnezzar possessed a weapon far more dangerous than steel. His goal was not merely to enslave these young men, but to rewrite them, to take the princes of Judah and forge them into the perfect instruments of the state. It started with the most intimate possession a man has, his name. In the ancient world, a name was not just a label to be called across a room. It was a destiny. It was the very architecture of a soul. Daniel carried a name that thundered with purpose. God is my judge. It was a constant reminder of who held the final verdict over his life. But the empire could not tolerate a loyalty divided, so they stripped it away. Daniel became Belteshazzar. May the lady protect the king, an invocation to a pagan goddess. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were buried under the titles of foreign deities. This was the first stroke of an ancient technology of brainwashing, identity erasure. The empire whispered a seductive lie into their ears day after day. Forget who you were. Forget your ancestors. Forget your God. You belong to Babylon now. But conquering the mind was not enough. The empire had to conquer the body. The royal tables groaned under the weight of the finest delicacies, succulent meats dripping with fat, exotic fruits, and wine that flowed like ruby rivers. To a starving captive, this was not punishment. It was unimaginable mercy. It was the dream of every man in the ancient world. But Daniel watched carefully. He saw what others missed. This was not merely food, it was communion. In the culture of the Chaldeans, to share the king's meat was to enter into a covenant with the king. Furthermore, these animals had been slaughtered on the altars of Marduk and Nabu. They were remnants of idol worship. To eat was to participate. To swallow that wine was to align one's soul with the spiritual frequency of the empire. It was a test designed to be failed, for who would refuse the king's bounty to eat the food of peasants? Most would have compromised. They would have rationalized that survival required assimilation. Why die for a menu? Why offend the hand that feeds you? But Daniel understood a profound truth. If you let Babylon feed you, eventually Babylon will own you. He realized that this was a political act of resistance disguised as a dietary choice. He could not stop them from changing his name on the official records. He could not stop them from teaching him their language, but he could stop them from entering his body. With quiet courage, he approached Ashpenaz, the chief official. He did not scream. He did not start a riot. He spoke with the calm authority of a free man living in chains. "Please," he said, "test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink." Ashpenaz hesitated. He liked Daniel, but he feared the king. To present these young men looking pale and weak would cost him his head. It was a gamble that defied biological logic. Vegetables and water against the protein and strength of the royal diet? It was suicide. But Daniel persisted. He was not betting on the nutritional value of the food. He was betting on the sustaining power of his God. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." The proposal was accepted. The clock began to tick. 10 days. 10 days of simple pulses in clear water, while their peers feasted on the fat of the land. When the time was up, they were brought out for inspection. The result silenced the court. Daniel and his friends did not look weak. They did not look deprived. They radiated a vitality that the king's wine could never produce. Their flesh was firmer, their eyes clearer, their minds sharper than all the youths who had gorged themselves on the empire's excess. In that moment, a silent message rang through the halls of the palace, louder than any trumpet. You can change their names. You can drag them to a foreign land. You can surround them with gold and gods of stone. But you cannot touch the spirit of a man who has decided that his identity belongs to heaven, not to history. They had won the first battle of the invisible war. They had kept their bodies pure, but more importantly, they had kept their souls awake in a city designed to put them to sleep. Peace is a fragile thing, even for the master of the world. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar's sleep was shattered. The king of Babylon, whose armies had crushed nations and silenced kings, woke up trembling in the dark. His heart hammered against his ribs like a war drum. He sat up, gasping for air, trying to catch the tail of a nightmare that was rapidly slipping away into the morning mist. The dream was gone, but the terror remained. It sat heavy on his chest, a disturbing certainty that what he had seen was not a fantasy of the mind, but a message from beyond the veil. The unease ate away at his soul. He summoned them all, the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, the best minds of the empire. They gathered in the Golden Hall, confident in their tricks, ready to offer vague platitudes to soothe the royal temper. But Nebuchadnezzar was not in the mood for riddles. He looked at them with eyes that burned with sleeplessness and paranoia. "I have had a dream," he declared, his voice echoing off the stone walls, "and my spirit is anxious to understand it." The Chaldeans answered smoothly, "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation." It was the standard procedure. Give them the data, and they would spin a meaning. But the king's reply struck them like a physical blow. "The command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces." Panic spread through the room like wildfire. This was impossible. They were interpreters, not mind readers. To interpret a dream was skill. To reconstruct a forgotten dream was supernatural. They pleaded, they reasoned, but their hesitation only fueled the king's rage. In his eyes, their inability was proof of their fraud. If they could not tell him what he had seen, how could he trust what they said it meant? The decree went out. The wise men of Babylon were to die. The sword of the executioner was sharpened, and it did not distinguish between the charlatans in the court and the faithful in the city. Daniel and his friends were caught in the net of the king's fury, but where others saw death, Daniel saw a door. He did not panic. He did not run. He returned to his house and sought mercies from the God of heaven concerning the secret. That night, the veil was lifted. The same video that had terrified the king was played before the eyes of the young exile, but this time it came with understanding. The next morning, Daniel stood before Nebuchadnezzar. The throne room was silent, the air thick with the tension of impending execution. Daniel looked at the most powerful man on earth and spoke with a calm that did not belong to a captive. "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked," Daniel began, his voice steady. "But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries." And then he took the king back into his own nightmare. "You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image, this great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome." Nebuchadnezzar leaned forward, the memory rushing back with violent clarity. "This image's head was of fine gold," Daniel continued, painting the air with his words. its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. It was a colossus of history, a timeline of humanity forged in metal, a statue that represented the devolution of value and the increase of hardness. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands. Daniel's voice rose, carrying the weight of the vision. It struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. The king sat frozen. He saw it all again, the collapse of the structure, the dust, and then the aftermath. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Silence hung over the court. Daniel had done the impossible. He had retrieved the file from the king's mind. Now he opened it. "You are this head of gold," Daniel declared. Babylon was the pinnacle of splendor, absolute and autocratic, but it was not eternal. "But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, the silver chest, the Medes and Persians, massive, wealthy, but lacking the singular glory of Babylon. Then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. Greece, swift, expansive, brilliant, ruled by the belly, appetite, and emotion. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron. Rome. It would not dazzle with gold or silver. It would crush with brute force. It would break in pieces and shatter all others. A machinery of war and law, cold and unyielding. But the vision ended in a strange mixture. Iron mixed with clay, strength mixed with brittleness. A divided world, partly strong and partly fragile, unable to adhere to one another. And in the days of these kings, while humanity argues over borders and power, the final act begins. The stone cut without hands. A kingdom not of human origin, not born of politics or armies, strikes the statue. It does not strike the head of gold or the chest of silver. It strikes the feet. It strikes at the end of history. Daniel looked the king in the eye and delivered the final verdict of the Almighty. The God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. It was a revelation that stripped Nebuchadnezzar naked. All his gold, all his armies, all his walls were nothing but dust waiting for the wind. The history of man was not an endless ascent to glory. It was a slow descent into hardness, ending in sudden catastrophe. The true power did not rest on the throne of Babylon, but in the hands of the one who throws down empires and sets up eternity. The dream was certain, and its interpretation was sure. The king heard the prophecy, but he did not hear the warning. Daniel had told him, "You are the head of gold." It was meant to be a limitation, a reminder that his time would pass. But pride is a deaf interpreter. Nebuchadnezzar's ego latched onto the gold and rejected the clay. If history decreed that his kingdom would be followed by another, then he would break history. He would not be just the head, he would be the entire body. He decided to rewrite his own destiny in metal and fire. On the dusty plains of Dura, a command echoed that shook the foundations of the economy. Artisans, engineers, and smiths were summoned from every corner of the known world. To understand the sheer madness of this project, we must look at the cost. A statue 60 cubits high, 90 feet of gleaming metal, does not rise by magic. It rises by force. Historians and engineers tell us that to erect such a colossus required a mobilization that bordered on insanity. For months, the horizon of Dura glowed red, not with the sun, but with the fires of 1,000 smelting furnaces. These were the forerunners of the king's wrath, burning day and night to liquefy the wealth of nations. It was a construction project that defied nature itself. Massive earth ramps were piled as high as mountains, Armies of laborers struggled against gravity to haul the golden face of the king to stare down the heavens. Every inch of that statue was a shout against the Almighty. I have no beginning, and I will have no end. It was a monument built not of metal, but of fear. Nebuchadnezzar was terrified of being forgotten, so he built a memory that was too bright to ignore. And the very furnaces that forged this glory were kept burning, waiting to consume anyone who dared to blink. The day of dedication arrived. The air was thick with heat and expectation. Satraps, prefects, governors, and advisors stood in formation. A sea of officials representing the machinery of the state. Then came the decree, sharp and absolute. When you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, and harp, you must fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. It was a test of allegiance. It was not enough to serve the king. You had to worship his reality. The music played, a calculated trigger for mass submission. And like a field of wheat flattened by the wind, the crowd collapsed. Thousands of foreheads touched the dust. But the uniformity was broken. Standing amidst the sea of prostrate bodies were three vertical lines: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They did not look around. They did not whisper to each other. They simply stood. In an empire of knees, they were the only pillars left. The report reached the king instantly. His fury was volcanic. This was not just disobedience, it was a personal insult to his masterpiece. He summoned them, his face twisted with rage. Yet in his arrogance, he offered them a way out, a second chance. "Is it true," he demanded, "if you are ready when you hear the music, fall down and worship. But if you do not, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. And what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" It was a rhetorical question. In Nebuchadnezzar's world, the king was the highest power. But the answer he received shattered the protocol of the court. The three young men did not apologize. They did not ask for a lawyer. They did not beg for time. "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand." And then they delivered the most dangerous line in the history of resistance. "But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." It was a declaration of total freedom. They were saying, our loyalty is not based on benefits. We do not worship God because he saves us. We worship him because he is God. You can kill the body, but you cannot coerce the soul. Nebuchadnezzar lost all reason. The mask of the civilized monarch fell away, revealing the tyrant beneath. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. The heat was so intense, so unnatural, that the strongest soldiers in the army, the very elite guard, collapsed and died just from approaching the opening. The three friends were bound, fully clothed in their tunics and trousers, and cast into the roaring mouth of the fire. They fell into the heart of the inferno. The king watched from a safe distance, expecting to see bodies curling into ash. He waited for the screams. He waited for the end. But instead, he saw movement. Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet, his eyes wide with a terror that no army could inspire. He turned to his advisors, his voice trembling. "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" "True, O king," they answered. "Look," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the flames. "I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." The laws of physics had been suspended. The fire was still fire. It had consumed the ropes that bound them, but it could not touch the men themselves. Inside the judgment of the king, they had found a sanctuary. The 4th man had not come to put out the fire. He had come to walk with them through it. In his pride, Nebuchadnezzar had built a statue to reach the heavens. But in the furnace, heaven had come down to earth. The king approached the opening, no longer a tyrant, but a witness to a power he could not comprehend. "Servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." They stepped out. The smell of smoke was not on them. Their hair was not singed. Their clothes were not scorched. The only thing they had lost in the fire were the ropes that held them. The fire of the world had only served to set them free. But the king's recognition of God was not born of submission. It was born of impact. And impact does not transform character, it only shocks it. As the smoke from the furnace cleared, so did the fear in Nebuchadnezzar's heart. The miracle faded into memory, and the old rhythms of the court returned. The initial admiration gave way to a dangerous, silent thought that grows in the hearts of powerful men, that perhaps the glory belongs to them after all. Deep within Nebuchadnezzar, two thrones competed for space. One was invisible, occupied by the truth he had glimpsed. The other was made of gold, fed by the constant praise of sycophants and the sheer scale of his dominion. One night, while Babylon slept beneath the glow of its torches, the king was visited once more by the world of dreams. This time, there were no metallic statues. There was life. He saw a tree, gigantic, cosmic in scale. Its top touched the heavens, and it was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant. It was a shelter for the world. But then, a watcher, a holy one, descended from heaven. The command shattered the peace of the vision. "Chop down the tree and cut off its branches, but leave the stump and its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze." The sentence was terrifyingly specific. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal, till 7 times pass over him. Daniel was summoned. When he heard the dream, he stood appalled. For a long time he could not speak. He saw the verdict hanging over the head of the man who had enslaved his people, yet he felt no joy, only a heavy sorrow. "My lord," Daniel whispered, "may the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation for your enemies." He then delivered the hard truth. "You, O king, are that tree. You have grown strong. Your greatness reaches to the heavens. But you will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox." Daniel offered one final counsel, a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. "Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be that then your prosperity will continue." Time passed, not a day, not a week, but 12 full months. 12 months of silence from heaven. 12 months for the king to humble himself. But mercy, when delayed, is often mistaken for approval. One afternoon, the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace. From this height, Babylon looked like a jewel box opened under the sun. The Ishtar Gate gleamed blue and gold. The Euphrates flowed like a vein of life through the city. The hanging gardens defied the logic of the desert. Nebuchadnezzar stopped. He looked at the horizon, and the thought that had been festering in his soul finally found words. "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence, by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? Why does a man of such intellect, a brilliant strategist and builder, suddenly lose his grip on reality? Why does he claim singular credit for a city built by thousands? Modern science calls this hubris syndrome. It is not merely arrogance, it is a pathology of power. Studies suggest that when a leader holds absolute, unchecked authority for too long, the brain's chemistry actually changes. The centers for empathy dampen. The connection to reality severs. The leader begins to view the self not as a servant of the state, but as the source of the state. They hallucinate their own indispensability. Nebuchadnezzar didn't just think he was great. He had lost the cognitive ability to distinguish between himself and God. He believed he was the uncaused cause of all that existed. But the moment the words left his lips, the buffer of time ran out. A voice fell from heaven. "This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. In an instant, the light of reason was extinguished. The mind that designed empires collapsed into chaos. The king was driven from the palace, not by a coup, but by madness. He fled into the wild. He stripped off his royal robes. He scrambled on the ground, tearing at the earth. For 7 years, the ruler of the known world lived as a beast. He ate grass like an ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven. His hair grew like the feathers of an eagle, and his nails like the claws of a bird. It was a horrifying image of reverse evolution. When a man refuses to acknowledge the image of God within him, he does not become a Superman. He descends into the subhuman. He becomes a slave to his basest instincts. The throne sat empty. The court whispered. The greatest tragedy was not the loss of the kingdom, but the loss of the man. But the story does not end in the dirt. At the end of that time, something shifted. Nebuchadnezzar stopped looking at the ground. He lifted his eyes toward heaven. And in that simple act of looking up, his reason returned. The fog lifted, the beast died, and the man was reborn. He did not rush back to the throne. He did not call for his guards. He knelt. And from the lips of the pagan king came a confession of pure monotheism. I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. He had learned the lesson that the fire could not teach him. He acknowledged that his dominion was borrowed, his power was a gift, and his pride was a lie. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. Time is a ruthless eraser. The lessons that cost one generation their blood are often treated as fairy tales by the next. Nebuchadnezzar had learned the hard way that heaven rules the earth. He had crawled in the dirt to find that truth. But when he died, his wisdom was buried with him. Decades passed. The throne of Babylon eventually fell to his grandson, Belshazzar. But where the grandfather had possessed a terrifying greatness, the grandson possessed only arrogance. He was a man who inherited power he did not earn and ruled a city he did not build. He mistook the patience of God for the absence of God. It is October, 539 BC, the night that will end an era. The palace is not sleeping. It pulses like a fevered heart. Inside the great banquet hall, 1,000 nobles, wives, and concubines are gathered. The air is thick with the smell of roasted meat and heavy perfume. Wine flows like the Euphrates itself. It is a celebration of excess, a party designed to drown out the rumors of war gathering at the borders. But for Belshazzar, drunkenness is not enough. He craves a spectacle. He wants to prove that Babylon is untouchable, that his gods are stronger than the ancient deities of conquered nations. A cruel smile spreads across his face as the wine clouds his judgment. He gives an order that sends a shiver through the few pious men left in the room. "Bring the gold and silver goblets," he commands, his voice slurring but loud. "The ones my grandfather Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple in Jerusalem." This was not a casual request. These were sacred vessels. They had been consecrated to the service of the Most High God, used to hold the blood of atonement. For decades they had sat in the treasury, untouched, silent witnesses to the captivity. Now they are dragged out to be party favors. The cups are filled with wine. The king lifts a holy vessel, toasts to gods of wood, stone, and iron, and drinks. The crowd roars in laughter. It is the ultimate act of desecration. They are using the things of God to praise the enemies of God. And then the party stops. It doesn't fade out, it is severed. The laughter dies in the throat. The music halts mid-note. The silence that rushes into the hall is sudden and violent. On the plaster of the wall, near the lampstand where the light is brightest, a hand appears. No body, no arm, just fingers. Human fingers, yet glowing with a terrifying autonomy. They begin to move, carving letters into the stone. The sound of the scratching echoes in the deathly quiet room. Belshazzar stares. The blood drains from his face, leaving him as pale as a corpse. The Bible describes his terror with clinical precision. His legs gave way, and his knees knocked together. The king who mocked the heavens a moment ago is now a trembling child, collapsing under the weight of the supernatural. "Call the enchanters," he screams. "Call the astrologers." But the wise men of Babylon are as useless as their gods. They stare at the inscription, but they cannot read it. The letters burn, but the meaning remains locked. The panic in the room rises like floodwater. Then, the Queen Mother enters. She remembers what the young king has forgotten. She remembers the days of old. "Do not be alarmed, O king," she says, her voice cutting through the hysteria. "There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the days of your grandfather, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom. Call Daniel." The doors open and an old man walks in. Daniel is now in his 80s. His hair is white, his step is slower, but his eyes are undimmed. He looks at the terrified king, at the spilled wine, at the profaned vessels. He sees the scene for what it is, a crime scene before the execution. Belshazzar tries to bribe him. "If you can read this, I will clothe you in purple and make you the third highest ruler in the kingdom." Daniel looks at the rewards with disdain. "Keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else," he answers. "I will read the writing for the king." But before he reads the words, he reads the king's soul. "O king, the Most High God gave your grandfather sovereignty and greatness. But when his heart became arrogant, he was deposed from his throne until he acknowledged that God rules over mankind. You represent the new generation, Belshazzar. You knew all this. You had the history. You had the warning, yet you have not humbled yourself. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven." He points to the sacred cups now overturned on the tables. "You praise the gods of silver and gold, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life in all your ways." Daniel turns to the wall. The inscription is no longer a mystery, it is a sentence. "Mene, mene, tekel, parsin." "This is what it means," Daniel declares, his voice ringing like a funeral bell. "Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end." It is a mathematical certainty. The account is closed. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Your life, your achievements, your pride, put on the balance against God's standard, and you are lighter than air. Empty. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. The verdict is immediate. There is no call to repentance this time. No 12-month extension. The line has been crossed. Belshazzar, perhaps in shock, keeps his word. He orders Daniel clothed in purple. But the robe is a shroud. That very night, while the court was distracted by the handwriting on the wall, the end had already arrived outside. The armies of Cyrus the Great had diverted the Euphrates River. The natural moat of Babylon was drained. The gates were left open in the drunken carelessness of the festival. The enemy did not besiege the city, they walked right in. There was no great battle, there was only a slaughter. Before the sun rose, Belshazzar was slain. The golden head of the statue was severed. The empire of Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, vanished in a single night, proving once and for all that history is not determined by the will of kings, but by the writing on the wall. Babylon had fallen, but Daniel remained. He was now an old man. The dark hair of his youth had turned to snow, and his movements carried the slow, deliberate weight of 80 years. He had outlived conquerors, survived kings, and navigated the treacherous currents of court life for decades. Now, under the new administration of the Medo-Persian Empire, King Darius looked at this Hebrew exile and saw something rare: absolute integrity. Darius planned to set Daniel over the entire kingdom, but in the corridors of power, Excellence breeds envy. The other administrators and satraps watched Daniel with jealous eyes. They began a forensic audit of his life. They scrutinized his records, watched his movements, and listened to his conversations. They were looking for a scandal, a bribe, a moment of negligence, but they found nothing. In a world fueled by corruption, Daniel was a terrifying anomaly. He was untouchable because he was blameless. Realizing they could not destroy him with the truth, they decided to destroy him with the law. They crafted a trap that was elegant in its malice. They approached the king, stroking his vanity with a proposed decree. For 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. It was a test of loyalty designed to look like patriotism. Flattered, Darius signed the document. The wax seal hardened, and under the immutable laws of the Medes and Persians, the decree became irreversible. Daniel learned of the document. He knew the signature was dry. He knew the penalty was death. Most men would have closed their windows. Most would have prayed in the secret of their minds, rationalizing that God knows the heart. But Daniel did not change his routine by a single degree. He went home to his upstairs room. The windows were open toward Jerusalem, a city that was still a ruin, a memory of a home he hadn't seen since childhood. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed. He did not hide. He did not perform. He simply continued. It was not an act of rebellion. It was an act of consistency. He refused to let the laws of men dictate his conversation with God. The spies were watching. They rushed to the king with their accusation. Darius was devastated. He realized too late that he had been played. He spent the entire day trying to find a legal loophole to save his most trusted advisor. But the law he had signed was a steel trap. At sunset, the order was given. Daniel was taken to the den. The mouth of the pit was opened, exhaling the scent of death. Before the stone was rolled over the entrance, Darius looked at the old prophet and spoke with a desperate hope. May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. The stone was sealed with the king's signet ring. Silence fell. That night the palace was a place of torment. The king refused food. He refused entertainment. Sleep fled from him. While the man in the den sat in darkness, the man in the palace sat in hell. At the first light of dawn, Darius ran to the lion's den. His voice broke as he called out, terrified of the silence that might answer him. Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? From the depths of the pit, a voice answered. It was calm, steady, and alive. O King, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. The stone was moved. Daniel was lifted out. There was no wound on him. The lions, starving and ferocious, had stood like statues before the presence of the Holy One. The miracle was not just that Daniel survived, it was that peace had reigned in a place of slaughter. In the end, the integrity of one old man proved stronger than the jealousy of 100 officials. The conspirators were cast into the very pit they had dug for another, and before they hit the floor, the lions overpowered them. The decree was rewritten. Darius wrote to all the nations of the earth, commanding them to fear the God of Daniel, the God who endures forever, whose kingdom will never be destroyed. The days of political maneuvering were over. The lion's den was a distant memory, and the kings who had once threatened Daniel's life were now dust in the royal tombs. Daniel walked slowly into the twilight of his life, his body carrying the weight of nearly a century. But as his physical strength waned, his spiritual sight became terrifyingly acute. He no longer looked at the throne of Babylon. He looked past it. In the quiet of his chamber, the veil between the natural and the supernatural began to tear. He saw great beasts rising from the churning sea of humanity. Empires portrayed not as statues of gold and silver, but as monsters of violence and appetite. He saw the rise of the Antichrist, the persecution of the saints, and the final judgment. These were not dreams, they were burdens. They made him sick for days. Driven by what he saw, Daniel turned to the ancient scrolls of Jeremiah. He calculated the dates. He realized that the 70 years of captivity were drawing to a close. But he did not pack his bags. He went to his knees. He understood that prophecy does not eliminate the need for prayer, it demands it. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, Daniel entered a state of deep mourning. He refused meat. He refused wine. He refused the comforts of an old man. He set his face to seek God on the banks of the Tigris River. Imagine the scene. Down on the earth, an old man is prostrate in the dust. His voice is a whisper, his body frail from fasting. He is asking for understanding. 1 day passes, 10 days, 20 days, and from the heavens, silence. The silence of God is often the sharpest weapon to test faith. In the echo of that empty room, Daniel might have whispered, "Have I been abandoned? Has the window finally closed?" But he did not know that right above the ceiling of his humble room, the spiritual atmosphere was being torn apart. 21 days of silence on earth, or 21 days of violent collision in the heavenlies. When the answer finally came, it arrived in the form of a celestial warrior, breathless from battle. The angel pulled back the curtain on the invisible mechanism of history. "Do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them." The delay was not indifference, it was war. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. The prince of Persia was not a human king. It was not a man of flesh and blood. It was a dark authority, a territorial spirit positioned behind the earthly throne to manipulate the mind of the empire. Daniel realized then that human history is not shaped merely by treaties and swords. There are forces at work in the shadows. His prayer had not hit a ceiling, it had hit a blockade. It was like a flaming arrow shot into the heart of enemy territory, triggering a massive counteroffensive to stop the message from getting through. The silence was not a denial. It was proof that the answer was so valuable, the enemy was willing to start a war to stop it. Daniel had been fighting on his knees so that the angels could fight in the air. The angel did not just clear the air, he cleared the timeline. Standing by the great river, Daniel was given a key that would unlock the future of his people and the holy city. It was not a vague prediction of weather or harvest. It was a mathematical framework for redemption. Gabriel spoke of 70 sevens, a countdown decreed by heaven to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. It was a staggering revelation. While the exiles were worried about going back to build a physical wall in Jerusalem, God was showing Daniel a blueprint for the reconstruction of the human soul. The angel pinpointed the arrival of the Anointed One, the Messiah. But the vision carried a dark twist. The Messiah would not take the throne immediately. He would be cut off and have nothing. The city and the sanctuary would be destroyed again. War would continue until the end. Daniel wrote it all down. The rise of Greece, the tyranny of Antiochus, the iron legions of Rome. But then the vision stretched further, leaping over centuries, past our own time, to the very edge of history. He saw the rise of a final world ruler. This figure was not like the kings of old. He was not a warrior like Nebuchadnezzar, or a politician like Darius. The scriptures call him the little horn, a master of intrigue who will arise when transgressions have reached their full measure. He will speak pompous words against the Most High. He will oppress the holy people. He will try to change the set times and the laws. He will be a genius of dark diplomacy. He will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. In a world desperate for peace and safety, he will offer a covenant, a treaty that looks like salvation, but is actually a snare. He will honor a God of fortresses, a God of raw power and technology that his fathers did not know. Daniel watched as his final empire devoured the earth, trampling it down and crushing it. He saw the abomination that causes desolation, a sacrilege so profound it stops the heart of the faithful. It was a vision of a world where the state demands the worship due only to the Creator, a global Babylon where the economy, religion, and government fuse into a single mechanism of control. The prophet's spirit was troubled. He saw a time of distress such as has not happened from the beginning of nations until then, a tribulation that would shake the foundations of the planet. But just when the darkness seemed absolute, the scenes shifted to the cosmic courtroom. I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. The court was seated, and the books were opened. This is the moment all history is rushing toward. The beast was slain, and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The dominion of the tyrants was taken away. And then breaking through the clouds of heaven came one like a son of man. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. It was the final answer to Nebuchadnezzar's statue. The stone cut without hands had arrived. Then the angel gave Daniel a promise that transcends politics, a promise that has comforted martyrs and saints for 2,500 years. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Death is not the end. The grave is not a permanent residence. It is a waiting room. The story of humanity does not end in a nuclear winter or a political collapse. It ends in resurrection. Daniel, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had seen, asked the question we all ask, "My Lord, what will the outcome of all this be?" The answer was gentle but firm. "Go your way, Daniel, because the words are rolled up and sealed until the time of the end." The old prophet was not given every detail. He was not told the day or the hour. He was given enough light to walk by, but not enough to see the end of the road. His job was done. He had stood before kings. He had walked through fire. He had stared into the mouths of lions, and he had pulled back the curtain of time. "As for you," the angel concluded, "go your way till the end. You will rest, and then at the end of the days, you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance." The vision faded. The room returned to silence, but the words remained, sealed in a scroll, waiting for the generation that would see them unrolled. The journey that began in the smoke of a burning Jerusalem ended in the quiet glow of an eternal promise. Daniel started as a face in a crowd of captives, a boy stripped of his home, his name, and his future. He was a fragment of a shattered nation, tossed into the machinery of an empire that intended to grind him into dust. But Babylon failed. It could conquer the land, it could burn the temple, but it could not reach the sanctuary within the man. Daniel outlasted the gold of Nebuchadnezzar. He survived the silver of the Persians. He watched as the most powerful men on earth, men who believed they were gods, fell into madness, died in drunken stupors, or were consumed by their own plots. Through it all, he remained standing, not because he was a master of politics, but because he was a servant of a truer reality. His life became a bridge between the temporal and the eternal, a testimony that the hush of a prayer can be louder than the roar of a lion. But as we close these ancient scrolls, we must realize that this is not just a story about the past. Look out your window. Look at the world around you today. We are living in a modern Babylon. It may not have hanging gardens or golden statues on every corner, But the spirit of the empire hasn't changed. We live in a world of stone and steel, of digital noise and relentless pressure. It is a world that still tries to rename you, to redefine your values, and to force you into a mold of conformity. Today's golden statues are made of fame, success, and the desperate need for approval. The music plays every hour of every day, through every screen in our pockets, demanding that we bow down and worship the status quo. We see the clouds gathering. We feel the unease that shook Nebuchadnezzar's throne. We live in an age where the foundations seem to be shifting, where empires of ideology rise and fall with the speed of a news cycle, and where the future feels like a dream we cannot quite interpret. But remember the man in the upstairs room. Daniel's secret was not his ability to see the end of history. It was his decision to keep his window open toward Jerusalem. Even when that city was a ruin, even when it seemed his God was silent, he kept his gaze fixed on the eternal. He refused to let the noise of Babylon drown out the whisper of the Spirit. The message for us today is clear. You do not have to be a victim of your circumstances. You do not have to surrender your identity to the noise of the age. In a world that demands your knees, you can choose to stand. In a culture that celebrates the temporary, you can anchor yourself to the everlasting. The stone cut without hands is still moving. The kingdoms of men, no matter how iron-strong they seem, are still destined to become as chaff on a summer threshing floor. But the one who leads many to righteousness will shine like the stars forever and ever. So, in the midst of your own Babylon, find your window. Keep it open. Let your life be a silent confrontation with the chaos of the world. Hold your ground with the quiet courage of someone who knows that the final chapter has already been written. The empires of this world will pass away. Their names will fade from the stone, and their monuments will return to the dust. But the word of the Most High endures. Be a Daniel in an age of Belshazzars. Stay steadfast, stay faithful, for the King is coming, and his kingdom shall have no end.